Hello, beautiful people. Welcome to On the Bright Line podcast, Tales from Recovering Food Addicts from the perspective of a physician, a therapist, and an off-the-wall storyteller. We are not affiliated or endorsed by Brightline Eating, and all content presented in this podcast represents our personal opinions and does not represent medical, nutritional, or psychological professional advice. Well, hello, and welcome to On the Bright Line podcast. On today's episode, we are going to talk about triggers. And so
Trigger warning.
we are giving a
Yeah.
trigger warning right now. We are going to talk about food, and we're going to talk about food that triggers us. So if talking about food triggers you, you probably just want to skip this episode. So we are going to, we just thought would be an interesting topic to talk about the things that trigger us, what we've heard about triggers, like maybe even how we deal with triggers, that sort of thing. But because, it is a real thing. We live in this world that is filled with the not my food and the not my drink. And our society, it's everywhere. I mean, it's literally like everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
And so, how do we deal with it? How do we, when we experience it, like, what does that look like? So I know you wanted to tell a story about voodoo donuts. So there you go. There's your first trigger warning, donuts.
Donuts. Yeah. So we were just talking about, there are a lot of people who are triggered by certain foods. I would say from about the fourth week on Bright Line Eating, I kind of stopped being triggered. And I mean, I just kind of have I guess I'm old enough, right? I'm in my mid to late 50s now. And so I have a kind of conversation with myself sometimes when I see stuff and I'm just like, yep, I've had that a bunch of times.
Yeah.
Know exactly what it tastes like. Know exactly how I'm going to feel if I ate it.
Yeah.
Don't want it. And I just don't. And I just don't. I'm so lucky. I don't care if I ever lost a pound to be free of the obsession with, just staring down every yummy thing, which was bread and sweets for me was my main thing. Bready sweets, not like candy, but like, pastries and stuff like that. Those were always triggering for me before I was on Bright Line Eating. And I just I wanted it. And then after I had it, I wanted more. And even if I was full and my stomach hurt, I wanted more. And it's just weird. Like since about the fourth week on the program, I just don't. And I was telling the story that there's a place called Voodoo Donuts and they have, I think it's a chain and it's different places, but they have it at Disney. And I was at a work meeting thing at Disney and, one of my coworkers like, oh, we got to go to Voodoo Donuts. It's just like, it's the best donut. And like, we walk in and it is just, I mean, I've been to a lot of donut shops, but this was definitely, it's over the top.
Some bougie donuts.
And the first thing that hit me was like the smell. I mean, cause they have, you go to a regular donut shop, there's like a counter with the donut. This is like, it's like a department store with just donuts everywhere. I mean, just open, like there's just shelves and shelves of donuts. And the smell of the sugar was so strong that it didn't smell like food, right? It didn't smell like food. So it wasn't like, I want some of that. It was like a chemically, it smelled chemically. It was so like, because I don't eat sugar anymore.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if you've ever accidentally gotten something in your mouth that had sugar since you've been on this planet, but you're like, it's like,
you're like, oh my gosh.
Yeah.
it's not good.
Yeah.
It's really kind of sad, but kind of wonderful.
Yeah.
But I looked around and I literally, it was like being in an art store that had a funky smell because the donuts were beautiful. They had all kinds of really cool and everything you can imagine in fun shapes. And there's like a voodoo doll shaped donut with little, the pretzel stick in it and the little X. I mean, it was really cute.
Yeah.
So it was like, I could appreciate the artistry of what they were making there, but it wasn't really triggering at all. And they're like, oh, don't you want one? I'm like, no. And it's like, again, the smell was like off-putting. It was so sugary that it was off-putting. So I think it's interesting, like once you kind of reset your brain off of sugar, it really does help with cravings. I think there are a few foods that have triggered me, not to the point of being at risk for breaking my line, but I mean, I just think about like, it's emotionally related. Like, I had a really, very stressful life event with my partner having a medical problem. Right. And I remember like having been at the hospital all day and really scared and so tired, my defenses are down.
Right.
And I'm sitting in a restaurant and somebody gets out a glass of wine and I'm like, I want a glass of wine, so that kind of trigger more like that would feel good to numb out for just a minute. Right.
Yeah.
And then again, not anywhere where I'm close to being acting on it or where I have to have an emergency action plan intervention or something, but I don't think I have just food triggers for like the sake of the food. It's going to be more like if I'm emotionally depleted,
Right.
Right.
and I'm not taking care of myself because I haven't been able to, or something's going on. But
Yeah.
Do you think that the reason you juggle things that might be triggering for other people, do you think that some of that is related to the mindset that you have about what those foods mean or represent for you now?
probably because that's the narrative I've put around it. Yeah. So
Yeah.
there's something I did consciously, but didn't
Right.
realize I did it. But yeah, I mean, I've had that little inner dialogue quite a bit, especially
Mhm.
early in the program
Yep.
when I
Mhm.
was trying to give up
Yep.
those foods,
Right.
is I really would just play that out in my mind. I'd sit and look at it and go, I mean, there's a place in town that, I call it's like the Jolly Green
The
Giant.
Snapdragon.
Snapdragon. On my island. And I mean, we joke like it's the reason we moved here, because we'd always go there when we were
Mhm.
coming out here before we moved here. And I mean, it's like all their pastries are giant. I mean, like the
Yeah.
cinnamon rolls
The
are that
Haggard
big.
size
Size
pieces.
Yeah,
of your
it's literally
head.
like
Yeah.
being at the Jolly Green Giant, bakery
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah.
And I can remember like those cinnamon rolls are a 2-person serving, and I would eat till I was sick
Mhm.
and just eat it
Mhm.
anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah, when we were first starting on the program and going through a grief process, because you do, right? You kind of
Absolutely.
grieve the loss of those
Mhm.
activities. Like just sitting at Snapdragon and having a pastry and a coffee was a beautiful
Mhm.
thing to do, right? It was
Yeah.
an activity to do. And I would have that conversation with myself over and over, like, okay, let me just go through the thought experiment. I'm putting it in my mouth. I'm taking a bite. I'm
Right.
taking another bite. Oh, I'm going to take so many bites. I'm sick.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then what? Then I just
Right.
feel gross and I gain a couple pounds,
Mhm.
and then I
Right.
come back and do it again. That's
Mhm.
that's where we're going to be at. Like
Mhm.
I'm never going to be satiated. There's never going to hit a point where I'm like, I've had
Enough.
enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, it's that one bite's not enough and 1,000 is, or one bite's too much and 1,000's not enough or something.
Yeah.
I'm saying it
Yeah.
wrong, but yeah. So I think maybe because I consciously kind of went through that deliberate dialogue with myself
Yeah.
as I kind of work through those foods, maybe that's what's helped. Yeah, it's a good
Yeah.
question. I don't know.
Yeah, I did that too. Like I remember very consciously at the beginning, like going through and like if I was confronted with the food, thinking, I mean, and I've told this story about that I had planned to cheat on Christmas with
Right.
cinnamon rolls. Like I had
Yes.
planned to cheat. I was like, I'm going to start this after Thanksgiving, which I did.
Right.
And I planned that, 25 days later or 26 days later, I
Right.
was going to cheat on Christmas and I was going to have the dang cinnamon roll, and it didn't matter. And when I got to that day, I really realized that like that was not going to be worth it. And so I played that game a lot too at the beginning, where I was like, I've eaten that food before. I know what it tastes like. I know what it feels like in my mouth. It's not worth what's going to happen to me, long term with my body. And, my why has always been my health, because my labs were so horrific when I started BLE that like, I just feel like if I will die. I will die if I go back. But I will tell you, my kryptonite, my trigger, my huge trigger is popcorn. And the funny thing is, guys, is like I have this in my house. My kids still eat it. But it is one of the hardest things for me. Like I was scared to go to the movies when I first
I
started.
remember you
Yeah,
talking
when I
about
first
that.
started BLE. And I did not, I mean, we used to be an like every week movie going family. Like I'd take my kiddos to the movies every week to see something. And I just was like, I cannot go and walk into a movie theater because the smell is going to hit me like a ton of bricks. And am I going to be able to be okay? I have since been back to the movies. I always eat before I go and I take sparkly water with me, but like I have to prep up for that. Like it is hard
Still.
for me still. Absolutely.
Mhm.
I could not go to the movies on an empty stomach. That would be horrible. Like that would be torture. So, yeah, I think that there's I don't know why it's not there. There's a few like on plan foods that can be kind of triggery for me. One of those being like salted cashews. Like those just they are reminiscent of popcorn. So like just that crunchy mouth feel that like I just I've tried and they're not in my plan. Like I just don't normally have them in my plan. And I don't normally have nuts on their own either, just because it's that crunchy mouthfeel. It's just super triggery to me. So like
Snacky.
it's
Yeah.
very snacky. And so I used to literally have a bag of microwave popcorn every night before I went to bed. Every single night, guys. Like that was my ritual. My ritual was like watching TV, eating the popcorn every night before I went to bed. And so That is definitely my kryptonite, and it's still triggering. Again, it's in my house. Like, I do make it for my kids. It's not, generally I'm like, this is okay. It's not my food. It's not worth me having. Yeah, I think that triggers are real. Like, I think it's a real phenomenon that people have. And I think you have to get your mind around it. I get asked this question all the time. Like, how do you deal with the grief over the fact that you can't have these foods anymore? And I continue to go back and will continue to say that it's my why. It's the reason is like, I can't have these foods because I will literally eat myself to death and I will die young and I will not be alive for my kids and my family. And that's not okay. Like, it's not okay. And I finally gotten to a place where I realized that no amount of, food pleasure, short-term food pleasure is going to be worth it in the long run for me, for my health. So I have to, I can't, I just can't put it in my mouth.
But that's a really interesting point, that navigating triggers, right, has helped solidify your why.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. And I think that might be kind of a useful technique for people to hit,
Well,
right?
and I can understand if people's whys was weight loss. Like, if you came into this program because you thought, I just want to lose weight and become a healthy body weight or the right weight or whatever the case might be, especially once you get there, how it would be really hard to maintain and not go back to the food. Like, I think that would be, I can see why that would be a really easy flip trigger, to be like, okay, well, I've made my weight. Now let's see if I can have some exceptions and still maintain this weight. And as we all know, and because we all know that doesn't really work. We've seen people try the experiment. And that's the other thing, is like, I've seen people try the experiment. I mean, geez, you could argue that popcorn could even be on plan because it's a whole grain. Like, you could make that argument. It's not, guys. Like, I hate to tell you, popcorn is not on plan, especially for Meagan McDonald. So maybe for other people it may be, but for Meagan McDonald, popcorn is not on plan. So I will just, I think that this is the mentality of the why, of why your why has to be bigger than the diet mentality. And we talk about this a lot in BLE, about getting away from the diet mentality. And that's the only way that this program really works, is to not have the diet mentality. And I think the triggers will, I don't ever want to say triggers will go away. I don't think I'm ever going to be safe around popcorn. I think it's always going to be my kryptonite. And I think I'll always have to know that about myself.
But I like that you put a plan in place. Like,
yes,
talk about that, Robin. I think, like, there's some triggers you can't plan for, but a lot of times, like, you're going to go to an event and there's going to be you're going to go into Voodoo Donuts with your friends
but I liked, I'll throw it right back to you. Right. I liked what you were talking about of run the why, right? Run the experiment in your head. What will happen if I do this? What good will
there's a phrase about this in BLE, and there's an acronym that I can't think of what it is now. I probably should stop my mouth. Tony Wade is yelling at the screen right now. I know.
Screaming at the podcast.
Love you, Tony.
Right.
Breathe, feel your feet, feel your seat. Is that
no. There's like I don't
That's
a
all
whoop
right.
or something like that. There's some acronym.
Oh, I got you.
Sorry, guys.
Right.
Let's just move on.
It's late and we're tired. Right. But that idea of thinking it through, of, where am I going tonight? What's going to be there? What might be tempting? What might I be saying to myself in my head about this? What part of me might be showing up, right? What little firefighter part might be showing up and telling me that it's fine to do that thing? And what does that conversation sound like in my head? What does that part need to hear? And how do I invite that part to step back a little bit so that it's not running the show?
And is there going to be an emotional trigger on top of a food trigger at this, am
Yeah.
I going to a wedding where I'm going to see that relative that I have friction with, and I know it's going to set me off? And and I think, like, if you're entering a situation where there's going to be triggers, like your idea, like eat before you go to the movies, so that you're at least not physically hungry, even if you're emotionally hungry, and then make your emergency action plan, and go make a phone call or step out.
Bookend it, talk to somebody before and after, that sort of thing. But I think there's other triggers that you can't plan for. So, like, we can talk about that a little bit too, is like, in that moment, like, if, let's say if you worked in an office, like somebody sets down, I've heard this time and time again, somebody sets down a box of donuts, like
cookies,
or
whatever,
cookies or whatever on your desk. And now you're like confronted with like, what do I do? And so it's like, I think that's where the emergency action plan really comes into place. It's like, now you're confronted with this. It's like, what do my, and this is something that I've been hearing a lot lately in the community, which I think is really important, is people practicing their emergency action plan. The ladies on my Gideon Games teams actually was spent like a couple of weeks just every day doing the things on their emergency action plan.
Right.
So it became muscle memory.
Yeah.
Well, and you also want to make sure they work.
Right. Yeah, that too. But if you're not using them in crisis, it's harder to know like how effective they are. But knowing that you have the tools in place and you know what they are and how to work down them, I think that that's really important, because like I said, you're confronted with the box of donuts that's sitting on your desk. If you're first, if you're like, oh gosh, I don't know what my emergency action plan is. I don't even know where my emergency action plan is.
Or I'm a people pleaser and I'm struggling with saying no to someone.
Yeah. But I think that's, enacting an emergency action plan. The first thing normally that people do is like breathe or take a, drink a glass of water or something like that. Something that's very like immediate that they can do.
Right.
And then, you start to go down the, calling friends, calling, reaching out for connection, that sort of thing. So it's, I think that you just, I think we live in, I said this at the beginning.
Yeah.
We live in a society where the way that we eat in Bright Line Eating is considered odd and strange in a diet, because we eat real whole foods and we eat them in reasonable quantities, and we don't, eat all day long. I know, how crazy.
Right.
Yeah. We're basically we're living in
crazy.
an opium den and decided we wanted to stop using opium.
And everybody else is a drug dealer.
Yeah.
So, and because of this, like this is the world we live in. And so in order to navigate this world until, everybody else gets on board, which is probably not going to happen, but, we have to be willing, and this is something else I've heard from people in the community. It's like, we have to be able to live in this world. Like we don't get to live in the BLE Disneyland. Like that would be lovely if we could all just go live in a commune and just, grow our own food and live in this peaceful, happy place. But we don't do that. And like, like me in my life, like I have children, and like NMF is, very constant in their lives. Even if it's not me bringing it into their lives, they might get it from other people
Or the birthday
and
party
the birthday parties or whatever, which is other things that can be triggering for people. So it's like you have to be able to walk through this world, even with the triggers in place, and figure that out. And how do you combat that? And I think having a plan, emergency action plan for unexpected, but just a plan in place for expected, like the movie example. It's like, how do you manage that? How do you walk through that and not be triggered, or not be triggered to the point of breaking? It might trigger you.
Yeah.
Which popcorn still triggers me, but it's not going to trigger me to the point of breaking and eating it. So.
And remember, you may be an example to somebody who don't realize it, Somebody might be that's also struggling with food addiction. Might be actually watching you and watching how you're coping with that. And you might be surprised when they come up one day and say, I don't know how you're doing that, but tell me what you're doing.
Yeah.
It's very true.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, Bonnie was my example for a long time before I started the program. So I saw her, manage quite well through, Robin and I eating and drinking whatever the heck we wanted. We were jerks that trip.
No, because you really weren't. Because like it really, like I'm able to put that out.
Yeah. Is that was pretty amazing looking back at it. That you were able to stay bright and run your program, even amongst us that were not being healthy. So, but that's okay. I mean, again, like this is the world we live in, and I want to be able to live in the world and walk through the world and not feel like not feel like I have to, adhere to anybody else or, conform to anybody else. But I also want to be able to just live in the world and not have to be like, I can't go there. I can't go there because there might be something that triggers me. So.
Yeah. I think working on, again, and we talk about this, even if you're really early in your program, starting to work through this is really important, because if you can kind of set this as a muscle memory habit, where you're just really, I mean, it becomes kind of cliche, NMF, not my food, NMD, not my drink, but it really is. If you can identify that, that voodoo donut is like, that's an interesting piece of art, but that's not
my food. Yeah.
It's literally not food. And that's how I think about those things. Like they're just interesting objects and they're not food.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Anything else about triggers?
No.
Okay. I'm going to say it for the third or fourth or 100th time this episode that we live in this world, guys, and there's triggery food out there. You know, sugar and flour abound, especially if you live in the United States. If you live other places, I'm sure that's true, but I can only speak from my own experience living here in the United States. Every meal, every restaurant, everything, you know, sugar and flour and lots of not my food. So, how do we live this life? How do we remain bright? How do we walk through these triggers? We put a plan in place. You know, we have our emergency action plan, and we lean into our
Connect
community.
yeah.
Lean into our community. So that is our episode today, guys. Thank you so much for listening. As always, if you have comments, questions, or show ideas, please hit us up at onthebrightlinepodcast@gmail.com or any of our socials. Have a wonderful, beautiful day. Bye-bye.